The mining colony of Verith 7 was not a beautiful world. It was gray and cold, with mountains of black rock and valleys filled with purple dust. But for the Keth people who lived there, it was home. 40,000 of them had built their lives on this small planet at the edge of known space. They mined rare minerals. They raised their children. They lived quiet, peaceful lives. The Keth were an insectoid species. They had 4 arms, compound eyes that shimmered like jewels, and hard shells that protected their bodies. Other species in the Galactic Coalition found them strange. Some found them ugly. But the Keth did not care what others thought. They were a gentle people who valued family above all else. Elder Bora was the leader of the colony. She was old, her shell faded to pale gray, but her mind was still sharp. She had guided her people through hard times before. Drought, equipment failures, a plague that nearly destroyed them. Each time, the Keth had survived because they stood together. But this time was different. The warning came at dawn. A young officer named Tylee was monitoring the communication station when her screen suddenly filled with red alerts. She felt her blood turn cold as she read the data. Ships, hundreds of ships, dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of their system. Tylee knew those ship designs. Every species in the galaxy knew them. The Malgari Dominion had come. The Malgari were not part of the Galactic Coalition. They came from beyond the mapped regions of space, and they had only one purpose: conquest. They did not want territory or resources. They wanted the people themselves. The Malgari harvested sentient beings for biological processing. No one knew exactly what that meant. No one who had been taken ever returned to explain. Tylee ran to Elder Bora's quarters. She did not knock. She burst through the door, her breath coming in quick gasps. Bora looked at the young officer's face and understood immediately. She did not waste time with questions. She simply said, "How long do we have?" 3 days, Tylee answered. "Maybe less." Bora closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were filled with quiet determination. Send a message to Coalition Command. Tell them what is happening. Request immediate assistance. Tylee nodded and ran back to her station. Her fingers moved across the controls as she composed the message. She described the enemy fleet. She gave their numbers and positions. She begged for help. The response came 2 hours later. Coalition reinforcements will arrive in 18 standard days. Hold your position. Tylee stared at the screen. 18 days. They had 3 days at most. The Coalition might as well have told them to die quietly. She brought the message to Elder Bora. The old leader read it without expression. Around them, the colony was already in chaos. Families were gathering their children. Workers were abandoning the mines. Everyone knew what was coming, and there was nowhere to run. 18 days, Bora said softly. They know we will not survive 18 hours once the Malgari land. Elder, there must be something we can do. Bora shook her head. The Coalition has made its choice. We are a small colony on the edge of their territory. We are not worth saving. Tylee felt anger rise in her chest. It was a feeling she rarely experienced. The Keth were not an angry people. But in that moment, she wanted to scream at the coldness of the galaxy. She returned to her station and sat in silence. Around her, the other officers were sending final messages to distant family members. Some were weeping. Others sat in stunned silence. The screen showed the Malgari fleet moving closer, a cloud of death crossing the stars. Tylee's eyes fell on an old communication panel in the corner of the room. It was dusty and outdated, connected to frequencies that the Coalition rarely used anymore. One of those frequencies belonged to Earth. Earth, the strange planet of the humans. Tylee knew little about humans. They had joined the Coalition only a century ago, making them the newest members. Other species did not think much of them. Humans were considered primitive, emotional, unstable. They had spent most of their history fighting wars against each other. The coalition had accepted them reluctantly and given them little respect. But Talai remembered a story her grandfather had told her. Once, long ago, a human merchant ship had found a Keth vessel stranded in space with failing life support. The humans had not asked questions. They had not requested payment. They had simply docked with the Keth ship and given them everything they needed to survive. When asked why, the human captain had said something strange. Because you needed help. That was it. No other reason. Talai did not know if the story was true. But in that moment of desperation, she found herself walking to the old panel. Her hands trembled as she activated it. She searched through ancient frequencies until she found the one labeled Earth Emergency Channel. She should have asked permission. She should have consulted Elder Bora. This was against protocol. Humans were not part of the coalition's military structure. They had no obligation to respond. But Talai was young, and she was afraid, and she did not want her people to die in silence. She pressed the transmission button and spoke. This is Varath 7 Colony. We are under attack by the Mulgari Dominion. Our population is 40,000, mostly families. The coalition cannot reach us in time. Please, anyone who hears this. We are dying. She sent the message and waited. Nothing. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Talai began to feel foolish. What had she expected? Humans were weak. Humans were looked down upon by every major species. What could they possibly do against the Mulgari? She was about to turn off the panel when static crackled through the speakers. Then a voice. A human voice, deep and calm. This is Admiral Kim Do-yun of the United Earth Defense Fleet. We received your transmission. Talai's heart stopped. She leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe. We are coming, the voice continued. Do not lose hope. Protect your people as long as you can. We will be there. Talai could not speak. Tears were forming in her compound eyes. How long? She finally managed to ask. There was a pause. Then the Admiral spoke again. We will be there in 14 hours. Hold on. The transmission ended. Talai sat in stunned silence. 14 hours. The coalition had said 18 days. The humans had said 14 hours. It was impossible. The distance alone should have taken weeks to cross. She ran to Elder Bora and told her everything. Bora listened without interrupting. When Talai finished, the old leader was quiet for a long moment. The humans, Bora said slowly. I have heard they are strange creatures. They make promises they should not be able to keep. Do you think they will really come? Bora looked out the window at the darkening sky. Somewhere up there, death was approaching. And somewhere else, perhaps, salvation. I do not know, she admitted. But for the first time today, I feel something I had forgotten. What is that, Elder? Bora turned to face the young officer. Despite everything, there was a small light in her ancient eyes. Hope. Outside, the first Mulgari ships entered the atmosphere. Their dark shapes blocked out the stars as they descended toward the colony. The Keth defenders took their positions, knowing they were outnumbered and outgunned. They prepared to fight and die for their families. But now, they were not just fighting to delay the end. They were fighting to survive until help arrived. In the cold darkness of space, far away but racing closer with every passing second, the humans were coming. And they were bringing fire and steel. Admiral Kim Do-yun stood on the command deck of the UEDF station called Indomitable. It floated in Earth's orbit, a massive structure of metal and glass that looked down on the blue planet below. Through the windows, Do-yun could see the curve of the Earth, the white clouds, the deep blue oceans. It was the most beautiful sight in the universe to him. He was 58 years old. His hair had turned gray long ago, and deep lines marked his face. He had spent his whole life as a soldier, first in the wars that had torn Earth apart before unification, then in the quiet decades of peace that followed, when humanity finally stopped fighting itself and looked up at the stars. Do-hyun remembered those wars. He remembered the blood and the fire. He remembered friends dying in his arms. He remembered making promises to himself in the darkness of battlefield nights. Never again. Never would he stand by while innocent people suffered if he had the power to help them. The message from Vera 7 had reached him 30 minutes ago. He had listened to the young Keth officer's desperate words 3 times. Each time, he felt the same cold anger building in his chest. The coalition would not save those people. The great alliance of 12 species, with all their advanced technology and mighty fleets, had decided that 40,000 lives were not worth the effort. But Do-hyun had not built his career on what was easy. He had built it on what was right. He turned to his communication officer. "Connect me to all ship commanders in the system. Priority channel, now." Within minutes, the faces of over 40 captains appeared on his screens. They were men and women of different ages, from different parts of Earth. But they all shared one thing. They were soldiers of the United Earth Defense Fleet, and they had sworn an oath to protect the innocent. "You have all received a transmission from Vera 7, Do-hyun said. His voice was calm, but heavy with meaning. "The Keth are dying. The coalition has abandoned them. I am asking each of you to join me on a mission that will break every treaty we have signed." He paused to let his words sink in. "I am activating Protocol Hammer." Silence fell over the channel. Protocol Hammer was the most classified program in human history. For a century, while the coalition looked down on humanity as primitive newcomers, Earth had been preparing. In secret shipyards, hidden in asteroid belts and behind moons, they had built a fleet. Not the small patrol ships they showed the coalition. Real warships. Vessels designed for one purpose: war. The coalition had banned certain weapons. Nuclear missiles, mass drivers, kinetic bombardment systems. They called these weapons barbaric. Humanity had agreed to the bans publicly. Privately, they had ignored every single one, because humans knew something that the coalition had forgotten. Peace was an illusion. Sooner or later, violence would come. And when it did, humanity intended to answer it with overwhelming force. One by one, the captains on the screen nodded their agreement. Captain Park Yuna was one of them. She was 34 years old, with sharp eyes and short black hair. She commanded the heavy cruiser Defiance, one of the most powerful ships in the secret fleet. Yuna had been born on a colony ship traveling between stars. She had never set foot on Earth until she was 20 years old. Space was her home. She opened a private channel to Do-hyun. "Admiral, may I speak freely?" "Always, Captain. The Keth have never shown us any kindness. The coalition treats us like children. Why are we risking everything for people who look down on us?" Do-hyun was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but firm. "Because they are afraid and alone. Because no one else will help them. Because no one else will help them. Because we remember what it was like to look up at empty skies and know that no one was coming to save us." He turned to look out at Earth. "We spent thousands of years fighting each other. We caused so much pain. But we also learned something valuable, Yuna. We learned what it means to suffer. And we learned what it means to stand with others who are suffering." Yuna considered his words. She thought of her grandmother, who had survived the Great Pacific War. She thought of her father, who had died building the colony ships that gave humanity its place among the stars. They had sacrificed everything so that future generations would be free. "I understand, Admiral," she said. "The Defiance is ready." Across the solar system, Protocol Hammer began. In the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, hidden hangar doors opened. Ships that had been sleeping for decades came to life. Their engines glowed blue as they powered up. Their weapons systems ran through activation checks. Behind the Moon Titan, 3 massive carrier ships emerged from concealment. Each one held 100 fighters and 2,000 Marines in cold sleep. Near Mercury, where the sun's heat had hidden them from Coalition sensors, a squadron of heavy destroyers began their launch sequences. In total, 47 warships answered the call. They were not elegant like Coalition vessels. They were ugly, brutal machines covered in armor and weapons. They looked like they had been built by people who expected to fight and did not care about beauty. Because they were. The ships gathered in formation near Earth. Do-Hyun looked at them and felt pride swelling in his chest. This was humanity's true face. Not the weak newcomers the Coalition believed them to be, but survivors, fighters, people who had clawed their way out of darkness and refused to let others fall into it. "All ships," Do-Hyun announced, "engage jump drives. Destination, Marith 7. The jump drives were another secret. Coalition ships used hyperspace lanes, fixed routes through the galaxy that took weeks to travel. Human engineers had developed something different, a way to tear through space itself. It was dangerous. It was unstable. 3 ships had been lost in testing, but it was fast. The fleet disappeared from Earth's orbit in a flash of light so bright that it could be seen from the planet's surface below. Inside the Defiance, Yuna gripped her command chair as the ship shook violently. The jump drive screamed with power. Warning lights flashed across every console. The metal walls groaned under stress that should have torn them apart. Lieutenant Choi Minho, the young weapons officer, looked at his screens with wide eyes. "Captain, 3 ships have fallen out of formation. Engine failures. They are turning back." Yuna nodded grimly. "The others?" "Holding together, barely." Across the fleet, similar scenes played out. Ships that should have broken apart somehow kept flying. Engines that should have exploded somehow kept burning. It was as if the ships themselves understood that failure was not an option. The journey that should have taken weeks lasted 14 hours. On Varith 7, the situation was desperate. The Mulgari ground forces had landed and were pushing toward the colony. The Geth defenders fought bravely, but they were falling back. Their weapons were meant for mining, not war. Their soldiers were workers and farmers, not trained fighters. Elder Bora stood on the colony's central tower and watched the battle. Fires burned on the horizon. The sounds of explosions filled the air. All around her, families huddled in underground shelters, waiting for the end. Young Talai appeared at her side. "Elder, we cannot hold much longer." "I know," Bora said quietly. "Do you think the humans will really come?" Bora did not answer. She did not want to give false hope. She did not want to promise something that might never happen. Then Talai gasped and pointed at the sky. Bora looked up. At first, she saw nothing but dark clouds and distant stars. Then she noticed something strange. Points of light were appearing where there had been none before. Dozens of them, growing brighter by the second. "What is that?" Talai whispered. The lights grew larger. They were moving with impossible speed, crossing the sky like falling stars. But these stars were not falling randomly. They were coming together, forming a pattern, taking positions around the planet. Ships, warships, an entire fleet dropping out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Bora felt her legs grow weak. She had lived for over 100 years. She had seen many wonders, but she had never seen anything like this. The first transmissions reached the planet. A human voice, strong and clear, echoed across all frequencies. "This is Admiral Kim Do-yoon of the United Earth Defense Fleet. We have arrived. To the Keth people, take shelter. To the Malgari, you have attacked innocents under our protection. We will give you one chance to withdraw." The message paused. "Refuse, and we will destroy you." In the sky above Vareth 7, the human fleet began to move. Fire and steel had arrived. The Malgari commander stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the human fleet with something close to amusement. His species had conquered hundreds of worlds. They had crushed armies and empires. These small ships from a backwater planet were nothing to fear. He sent his response to the human admiral. "Will you not negotiate with prey? You will be harvested along with the insects." The human response came immediately. It was not words. It was fire. The first salvo struck the Malgari fleet like the fist of an angry god. Human weapons were not like coalition weapons. They did not use elegant energy beams that cut through shields with surgical precision. They used brute force. Kinetic slugs the size of cars, accelerated to terrifying speeds by magnetic rails. Missiles that split apart into dozens of smaller warheads, each one carrying enough explosive power to destroy a city block. 3 Malgari ships vanished in the first 10 seconds of the battle. On the bridge of the Defiance, Captain Yuna watched the carnage unfold on her screens. The Malgari had over 300 ships. The humans had 44. By every law of naval warfare, the humans should have been destroyed. But the Malgari had never fought humans before. "All batteries, continuous fire," Yuna commanded. "Do not give them time to regroup." Lieutenant Choi Minho sat at his weapons console, his hands moving across the controls with growing confidence. He had trained for this moment his entire adult life. He had spent thousands of hours in simulations, learning to fire every weapon on the ship. But simulations were not real. The first time he pressed the firing command, his hand shook. It was taking lives. Real lives. Even if those lives belonged to monsters, it was still a terrible thing. By the 3rd volley, his hands were steady. By the 10th, they were cold. He understood now what his instructors had tried to teach him. In battle, there was no room for doubt. There was only the mission: protect the innocent, destroy the enemy. Everything else had to wait until the fighting was done. The Malgari fleet began to respond. Their weapons were powerful, and they outnumbered the humans badly. Energy beams cut across space, striking human ships and burning through armor. One destroyer, the Resolute, took a direct hit to its engine section and exploded in a ball of fire. Yuna watched the explosion on her screen. 87 people had just died. She felt the loss like a knife in her heart, but she did not let it show on her face. Her crew needed her to be strong. "Focus fire on their command ship," she ordered. "If we take out their leader, the rest will panic." The human fleet adjusted its formation. Ships moved with practiced precision, forming a spear pointed directly at the Malgari flagship. The enemy commander saw what was happening and tried to retreat, but it was too late. Admiral Do-yoon's voice came over the fleet channel. "Launch all nuclear torpedoes. Target the flagship." The torpedoes streaked across the void, glowing trails of death in the darkness of space. The Malgari flagship tried to shoot them down, but there were too many. They struck in rapid succession, each one releasing the power of a small sun. When the light faded, the flagship was gone. Below, on the surface of Vareth 7, the battle continued. The Malgari ground forces had been advancing toward the colony when the human fleet arrived. Now they found themselves under attack from above and behind. Dropships fell from the sky like metal rain. They were ugly, boxy things, built for function rather than form. Each one carried 50 human marines in powered armor, along with weapons and equipment. Colonel Han Jisoo was on the first dropship to touch ground. She was 41 years old, with a face hardened by years of combat training and eyes that had seen too much death. She had joined the military as a teenager, running away from a broken home. The UEDF had become her family. Her boots hit the gray soil of Vera 7, and she immediately began giving orders. Spread out. Form a perimeter. Do not let any Malgari reach the colony. The Marines moved with silent efficiency. Their armor made them look like giants, 7 feet tall and bristling with weapons. Built into their suits were strength enhancers that let them lift vehicles. Medical systems that could keep them alive through wounds that would kill an ordinary person. And communication devices that connected them to every other Marine on the battlefield. The Malgari had never faced enemies like this. Jisoo led her squad toward the front lines, where the Keth defenders were making their last stand. She could see them through her helmet's sensors. They were civilians, armed with mining tools and hunting weapons. They had no armor, no training, but they stood their ground anyway, fighting to protect their families. A group of Malgari soldiers was advancing on a damaged building. Jisoo scanned it and found dozens of life signs inside. Keth civilians, mostly children. With me, she said to her squad. They moved fast. The Malgari never saw them coming. Jisoo's rifle spat fire, each shot hitting its target with perfect accuracy. Her Marines spread out around her, forming a wall of steel between the enemy and the building. The fight lasted less than a minute. When it was over, 18 Malgari lay dead on the ground. Jisoo approached the building carefully. "This is Colonel Han of the United Earth Defense Fleet," she called out in the common galactic language. "You are safe now. Come out slowly." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened, and a young Keth child stumbled out. She was small, barely reaching Jisoo's waist, even in armor. Her compound eyes were wide with fear and confusion. Jisoo knelt down, making herself smaller and less frightening. She removed her helmet so the child could see her face. A human face. Strange to Keth eyes, but not unkind. "It is okay," Jisoo said softly. "I am here to help you." The child stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and touched Jisoo's face. Her small fingers traced the human's features. The soft skin. The single pair of eyes. The strange hair. "You came," the child whispered. Jisoo nodded. "We came." Behind the child, more Keth emerged from the building. Adults carrying infants. Elderly leaning on younger relatives. They all stared at the human soldiers with the same expression of disbelief and hope. One of them, an old male with a cracked shell, spoke in a trembling voice. "The Coalition said no one could reach us in time. They said we were too far away." "They were wrong," Jisoo replied simply. The battle continued for 3 more hours. In space, the human fleet systematically destroyed the Malgari ships one by one. On the ground, the Marines pushed the enemy back with relentless pressure. The Malgari, accustomed to easy victories against helpless prey, found themselves facing something completely different. Humans did not fight like the Coalition species. They did not retreat when losses mounted. They did not negotiate when the odds turned against them. They fought with a cold, calculated fury that seemed to grow stronger with every fallen comrade. And they protected the Keth with their own bodies. In the final hour of the battle, Sergeant Beek Ga found herself defending a medical tent filled with wounded Keth civilians. A Malgari assault squad had broken through the lines and was approaching fast. Ga was alone. Her squad had been scattered across the battlefield. Her ammunition was running low. The smart thing would have been to retreat, to save herself and let others defend the tent. She did not retreat. She planted herself in front of the tent and fired until her rifle was empty. Then she drew her sidearm and kept firing. When that was empty too, she charged the remaining Mulgari with her combat knife. They found her body 20 minutes later, lying in a circle of dead enemies. She had killed 7 of them before they brought her down. Inside the tent, 32 Keth civilians survived because of her sacrifice. As the last Mulgari ship fled into hyperspace, Admiral Do-hyun allowed himself a moment of quiet. The battle was won. Vera 7 was saved. But the cost had been high. 12 human ships destroyed. 847 men and women dead. Young people who would never go home, never see their families, never live the lives they had dreamed of. Do-hyun closed his eyes and remembered each of their names. On the surface, Colonel Jisoo stood in the ruins of what had been the battlefield. Around her, human Marines were helping Keth civilians out of shelters. Medical teams were treating the wounded. Engineers were already working to repair damaged buildings. The little Keth girl, who had first emerged from the building, was still following. Jisoo, she had refused to leave the colonel's side. "What is your name?" Jisoo asked her. The child answered in her own language, a series of clicks and whistles that Jisoo's translator rendered as a complex phrase about starlight and hope. Jisoo smiled softly. "That is beautiful. That is beautiful. But it is hard for humans to say. May I call you Hannah?" It is a human name. It means flower. The child considered this for a moment. Then she nodded. "Hannah," she repeated carefully. "I like it." Jisoo took the child's small hand in her armored glove and led her toward the medical station. The sky above them was finally clear. The fire had stopped falling. But for the people of Vera 7, both Keth and human, this day would never be forgotten. The morning after the battle was quiet. A strange, heavy quiet that comes after great violence. The fires had burned out. The weapons had fallen silent. But the weight of what had happened hung over Vera 7 like a cloud. Colonel Han Jisoo walked through the field where the worst fighting had taken place. Her boots left prints in the gray dust, dust that was now mixed with darker things. Bodies of Mulgari soldiers lay scattered across the ground. Her people were already collecting them for disposal. But it was not the enemy dead that made her heart ache. She stopped in a row of human forms covered in white sheets. 23 Marines had fallen defending the colony's eastern sector. They had held their position against overwhelming numbers, buying time for civilians to escape. Every single one of them had known they would probably die. None of them had retreated. Jisoo knelt beside one of the covered forms and gently pulled back the sheet. The face beneath was young. Too young. Sergeant Lee Sunwoo had been 29 years old. He had grown up in a small fishing village on Earth's southern coast. He had joined the Marines because he wanted to see the stars. He had died holding a defensive position for 3 hours with a hole in his chest. Jisoo had been there at the end. She had held him as the light faded from his eyes. His last words had been a simple request. "Tell my mother I was brave." She covered his face again and stood up slowly. Her body felt heavy, as if she was carrying not just her armor, but also the weight of everyone she had lost. Captain Yuna found her there an hour later. The ship captain had come down from orbit to see the aftermath firsthand. She walked among the human dead without speaking, her face pale and drawn. "I knew some of them," Yuna said quietly. "Lieutenant Cho on the Resolute. We trained together. He had just gotten married." Jisoo nodded but said nothing. There was nothing to say. War always took the young, the hopeful, the ones with the most to live for. In the colony itself, the mood was different. The Keth were emerging from their shelters, blinking in the pale sunlight. For the first time in days, they were not afraid. Children ran through the streets, laughing and playing as if nothing had happened. Parents watched them with tears streaming down their faces. Elder Bora stood in the central square and watched the humans move among her people. Medical teams were treating the wounded. Engineers were repairing broken infrastructure. Soldiers were distributing food and water from their own supplies. Young Talai approached her. "Elder, I do not understand. These humans barely know us. Why are they doing all this?" Bora was quiet for a long moment. She had been asking herself the same question since the battle ended. "I do not know," she admitted, "but I intend to find out." She made her way to the command post the humans had established near the landing zone. Admiral Do-hyun was there, coordinating the relief efforts. He looked exhausted. Deep shadows marked his eyes, and his uniform was rumpled. He had not slept since before the battle. When he saw Bora approaching, he straightened and offered a small bow of respect. It was a gesture from his own culture, adapted for this strange meeting between species. "Elder Bora," he said, "how can I help you?" Bora studied his face. It was so different from Keth faces. Soft skin instead of hard shell. 2 eyes instead of many. But the expression in those eyes was something she recognized. Kindness and sadness. "Admiral, I must ask you something. Your people have sacrificed so much for us. Over 800 of your soldiers died defending strangers. Ships that took years to build were destroyed in hours. Why?" Do-hyun considered her question carefully. When he spoke, his voice was soft but steady. "Do you know the history of my world, Elder?" Bora shook her head. "For thousands of years, humans fought each other. We divided ourselves by the color of our skin, by the languages we spoke, by the invisible lines we drew on maps. We caused so much suffering to our own kind that sometimes I wonder how we survived it all." He paused, looking up at the gray sky. But through all that darkness, there was one thing that kept appearing. Again and again, in every culture and every time period, there were people who stood up to help others. Strangers helping strangers. Enemies becoming friends. People risking their lives for others they had never met. He looked back at Bora. That is who we are trying to be now. Not the humans who destroyed and conquered, but the humans who protect and heal. We cannot change our past, but we can choose our future. Bora felt something shift inside her. For all her years of wisdom, she had never heard anyone speak like this before. The coalition species talked about treaties and trade agreements. They talked about mutual benefit and political alliances. No one talked about simply helping others because it was the right thing to do. "Thank you, Admiral," she said. "Thank you for coming when no one else would." Before Do-hyun could respond, alarms began to sound across the camp. Officers rushed to their stations. Screens lit up with incoming transmissions. The coalition fleet had finally arrived. 18 days late, as promised. 200 ships dropped out of hyperspace and took positions around the planet. Their commander, Admiral Ran of the Surexi, demanded an immediate meeting with the human leadership. The meeting took place on the coalition flagship. Do-hyun went alone, despite his officer's protests. He walked into the great hall where Ran waited, surrounded by representatives of a dozen species. Rahan was a Surexi, a tall being with blue skin and cold eyes. His species had been founding members of the coalition. They considered themselves the guardians of galactic law and order. "Admiral Do-hyun," Rahan said, his voice hard with anger, "you have committed serious crimes. You deployed military forces without coalition authorization. You used weapons that are banned under the Geneva Proxima Accords. You have undermined the legal framework that has kept peace in this galaxy for 3 centuries. Do-hyun stood perfectly still, his face calm. "I saved 40,000 lives, he replied simply. Ran's expression darkened. "That is not the point. There are rules, procedures. You cannot simply ignore them because you feel like it. Your rules would have let the Keth die. That is not your decision to make. Something changed in Doyun's eyes. The calm patience vanished, replaced by something colder. Then whose decision is it, Admiral? Yours? You who sat safely in your territory while innocents were slaughtered. You who told them to wait 18 days for help that would arrive only in time to count their bodies. He stepped forward, and Ron actually took a step back. I will not apologize for what I did. Put me on trial if you wish. Punish Earth if you can. But know this, the next time innocents call for help, we will answer again. And your laws will not stop us. The hall fell silent. No one had ever spoken to a coalition admiral this way. Before Ron could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. If Earth is punished for saving us, the Keth will withdraw from the coalition. Everyone turned to see Elder Bora standing at the entrance of the hall. She had followed Do-Yoon aboard without permission. Behind her stood Talai and a dozen other Keth representatives. Bora walked forward until she stood beside the human admiral. We owe these humans a debt that can never be repaid, she continued. They came when no one else would. They bled and died for strangers. If this coalition punishes that kind of courage, then this coalition has lost its soul. The words hung in the air. Then, one by one, other voices joined hers. The ambassador from the Vela spoke. My people stand with the Keth, and with Earth. The representative of the Koran nodded. As do we. More voices followed. 6 species in total, declaring their support for humanity. It was enough to block any action against Earth. Ron's face twisted with frustration, but he had no choice. The tribunal could not proceed without consensus. As Darren left the hall, Bora walked beside him. Thank you, he said quietly. You did not have to do that. Bora made a sound that might have been a laugh. Admiral, you came across the galaxy to save my people. The least I could do is speak a few words in your defense. She paused at the airlock that led to the human shuttle. May I ask you one more question? Do nodded. In your culture, how do you say thank you? Do-Hyun thought for a moment. Then he spoke a word in his native language, Korean. A simple word that carried the weight of genuine gratitude. Bora tried to repeat it. Her mouth was not made for human sounds, and the result was awkward. But Do-Hyun smiled, the first real smile he had allowed himself since the battle began. Close enough, he said. Close enough. 1 year passed. The galaxy changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Battle of Varath 7 became the most discussed event in Coalition history. Every species had an opinion. Some called the humans heroes. Others called them dangerous. But no one could ignore them anymore. Earth was no longer a backwater planet inhabited by primitive newcomers. By unanimous vote of the species that had supported them, humanity was granted a permanent seat on the Coalition Security Council. The secret fleet was revealed to the public, and instead of causing fear, it inspired something else, confidence. The knowledge that somewhere out there, someone was watching. Someone would answer the call. The Rapid Response Force was created 6 months after the battle. Its mission was simple. Respond to any distress call, anywhere in the galaxy, immediately. No waiting for committee decisions. No political debates. Just action. Admiral Kim Do-Yoon was offered command of the new force. He refused. He was 60 years old now. His body was tired, and his heart needed rest. He had spent his whole life serving others. Now he wanted to serve himself for a little while. He returned to Earth, to the Korean peninsula where he had been born. He bought a small farm in the mountains, far from the cities and the noise. He planted rice in the spring and watched it grow through the summer. In the autumn, he harvested it with his own hands. At night, he sat on his porch and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, his people were still protecting the innocent, still answering calls for help, still doing what he had trained them to do. He slept peacefully for the first time in decades. Captain Park Yuna took command of the Indomitable. It was the largest ship in the human fleet, now refitted with the latest technology and weapons. Under her leadership, it became the flagship of the Rapid Response Force. Her first order was to install long-range distress receivers on every ship in the fleet. These devices could detect emergency signals from across the galaxy. No call for help would go unheard. Her second order was more personal. She created a memorial wall on the ship, a long corridor lined with photographs and names. Every human who had died at Vareth 7 was honored there. Yuna walked that corridor every day, making sure she remembered each face. Lieutenant Choi Min-ho transferred to the UEDF Training Academy. He could have had any assignment he wanted. He was a hero now, a veteran of the most famous battle in human history. But he chose to teach. His classes were always full. Young officers came from all over Earth to learn from him. He taught them tactics and weapon systems and naval strategy. But the lesson he emphasized most was simpler than all of that. Weapons are nothing, he told them. A gun is just metal and chemistry. A missile is just fuel and guidance systems. What matters is what you are willing to do with them. And why? He looked at his students with serious eyes. We do not fight because we love war. We fight because there are people who cannot fight for themselves. Remember that, and you will never lose your way. Colonel Han Jisoo returned to active duty after 3 months of rest. She was promoted to general, given command of all ground forces in the Rapid Response Force. But every year, on the anniversary of the battle, she took leave and traveled to Vareth 7. The colony had changed since that terrible day. New buildings had risen. New families had arrived. The Kef population had grown from 40,000 to nearly 100,000. People came from all over the galaxy to live in the place where history had been made. A monument stood in the center of the colony. It was a tall pillar of white stone, carved with the names of every human who had died in the battle. At its base, an inscription had been written in every language of the coalition. They heard strangers cry for help. They answered with everything they had. Jisoo visited the monument every year. She brought flowers from Earth and placed them at the base. She read the names out loud, one by one, making sure each person was remembered. And every year, a young Keth woman came to meet her. Hannah was 10 years old now. She had grown tall for her species, with a shell that shimmered like silver in the sunlight. She had learned to speak Korean, teaching herself from recordings and language programs. She wanted to honor the woman who had saved her. When Jisoo arrived this year, Hana was waiting at the landing pad. She ran to the general and threw her arms around her, the way she had done every year since the battle. "You came," Hana said, the same words she had spoken when they first met. Jisoo smiled and held her tight. "I will always come." They walked together to the monument, two people from different worlds who had become family in the fire of war. Hannah had decided what she wanted to do with her life. She wanted to join the UEDF. She wanted to protect others the way she had been protected. Jisoo did not try to talk her out of it. She understood. Far away, on the other side of the galaxy, a distress signal was being transmitted. A small colony on a frozen moon. 2,000 people, mostly scientists and their families. They were under attack by raiders, criminals, who preyed on isolated settlements. Their defenses had failed. Their shields were down. They had sent calls to the local authorities, but help was too far away. They were going to die. Then the sky lit up. 20 human ships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. They had been on patrol nearby and had intercepted the distress call. Within minutes, they engaged the raider fleet. Within hours, the battle was over. A young alien child stood in the ruins of her home, trembling with fear and exhaustion. Her parents held her close, staring at the sky in disbelief. Ships were descending. Landing craft were touching down. Soldiers in strange armor were emerging, their weapons still hot from battle. The child did not understand. Her world had been ending moments ago. Now strangers were everywhere, securing the perimeter, treating the wounded, distributing supplies. Her mother looked at one of the soldiers and asked a simple question. "Who are you? Why did you come?" The soldier removed her helmet. She was human, young, with tired eyes and a gentle smile. "We are the Rapid Response Force of the United Earth Defense Fleet," she said. "We came because you called for help. But how did you get here so fast? No one else could have reached us in time." The soldier's smile widened slightly. "We always find a way." The news spread across the galaxy within hours. Another human rescue. Another colony saved. The pattern was becoming familiar now. Wherever people were in danger, wherever the innocent were threatened, the humans appeared. They came out of nowhere, fought like demons, and vanished before anyone could properly thank them. Some species still distrusted humanity. They saw the secret fleet and the banned weapons and the willingness to ignore coalition law. They worried about what would happen if humans ever turned that power against them. But others saw something different. They saw a species that had learned from its violent past, that had taken all its capacity for destruction and channeled it toward protection, that had decided to be guardians instead of conquerors. On that frozen moon, the young alien child looked up at the human soldier with wide eyes. "Will you always come?" she asked. "If we are in trouble, will you always come to help?" The soldier knelt down to look the child in the eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "The humans will always come." And far away, on a peaceful farm in the mountains of Korea, an old admiral sat on his porch and looked up at the stars. He did not know about the rescue that had just happened. He did not need to. He had trained his people well. Kim Do-yeon smiled and closed his eyes. The sky was vast and dark and full of danger, but it was also full of hope. Because somewhere out there, whenever someone cried out for help, humanity would answer. With fire and steel, always.